This is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is proposing a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine that would be a separate government, separate from the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, based on democratic principles, with a legislative body, a judicial body, and an executive body. A government that would be secular for the people of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. We believe that this government will make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians and will enhance the interest of the Israeli and the Palestinian people. And this is what we will be doing today during the simulation. My name is Joseph Avasar. My email is josephavassar@gmail.com. If you wish to send me comments after the simulation, I would very much appreciate receiving it, and I will respond to you. The website is ipconfederation.org. It has the Constitution of the Confederation government. It is in 3 languages: Arabic, English, and Hebrew. If you go to the English or the any language you choose, you could read the Constitution, and you can read. So if I go to the Constitution, I can see what the Confederation government is all about, how it separates between government and religion, all the branches of the government, and how it would be elected, and how it would deal with the Israeli and the Palestinian government. So that it is clear, we are not proposing the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are proposing the creation of a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine. When you're in the website, you can also watch and hear previous simulations that we have. All you have to do is click on the person you're interested in watching or hearing, and you'll have it right there on our website. Today we are happy to have as our guest speaker GADI BALTIANSKY. GADI BALTIANSKY served as press secretary to former Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He also served as a diplomat in the Israeli Foreign Service and took part in the negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. He is the Director General of Education for Peace, known also as the Israeli branch of the Geneva Initiative, an NGO that promotes peace between Israel and Palestinians. His works includes policy consulting, political and public advocacy, and peace education. Mr. BALTIANSKY received his bachelor's degree in political science and international relations from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University. We are inviting several people, many people, to opine during the simulation on the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation proposed government. We are inviting people with all kinds of views all points of views, not pro one side or another. Our next speaker on January 23rd will be A.B. Yehoshua, Aleph Bet Yehoshua, who is a very well-known Israeli novelist and author, and he is very opinionated regarding this conflict. And now I believe Haaretz had a major article about him and his political Israeli-Palestinian points of views. On February 6th, we will have Jonathan Kutab, who is a Palestinian civil rights lawyer. On February 20th, we will have Professor Sami Smuha, who is a professor at Haifa University in Israel. He's an expert on Israel and the Middle East and economy and society. On March 6th, we will have Alon Ben Meir. He is a political science professor at New York University. He told me that he would be publishing his own Confederation paper during that time, and he is very interested in what we are doing. On March 20th, we will have Professor Shibli Telhami. He's a professor of political science. On April 24, we will have Ohio State University Professor of Law, John Quigley. And on May 8, we will have Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson, who was the Chief of Staff of the late Secretary of State, Colin Powell. The timeline for the simulation is estimated to be between 90 to 120 minutes. We will have several segments in the simulation, which will be followed by asking Mr. Baltiansky to opine upon those segments. And then we will have a conversation with Mr. Baltiansky and questions and answers. Here is a short video that explains what the Confederation is about, that would explain the idea.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations, and instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So the objective of the simulation is to demonstrate how the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation could make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but not only between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also between all the neighbors with Israel and with the Palestinians. We are not having a historical review of who is to blame in this simulation. I know in the past, we kind of was pushed into that of trying to have, not to have a historical review of who is to blame. We're not anti-Israeli or anti-Palestinians. We are pro-peace. And we will have our own narrative. And we expect that the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, when it is established, will have its own narrative. It's not going to have the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian narrative, but a global narrative for the whole area. Mr. Baltiansky was asked to speak and opine on what we are doing. He is not a representative of the IPC. He was asked to participate as part of the stress test that we are conducting in inviting many people and getting their opinion. So so that it's clear, none of the speakers we invite are, including Mr. Baltiansky, are representative or spokespeople for the IPC. Mr. Baltiansky has his own vision. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. We do not preclude the Israeli or the Palestinians reaching their own agreements, their governments reaching their own agreements. We are not against any, or we are not precluding any other solution for peace by any other organization. We believe, however, that our proposal is the best proposal. It makes the most sense, but we are not claiming exclusivity on this issue. We will ask Mr. Baltiansky and all of you to judge the plan that we are submitting based on three criteria. Could the IPC formula attain peace? That's the goal. Could it attain peace? Is the IPC plan implementable? There is no point in having a plan that is not implementable. So is it implementable? And is there a downside to either the Israeli or the Palestinians if this peace plan is implemented? These are the three criteria that we will be asking Mr. Baltiansky and all of you to judge the IPC formula on that basis. We are proposing legislation, we are proposing a constitution so that it is clear we are not the IPC government. The IPC government has not been created. We are just demonstrating how it could be functioning and how it could make peace. What we will show you today is probably 2, 3, maybe 4 legislation, and that's the tip of the iceberg of what the IPC could do. We believe it could do a lot more, but we are limited by time. We're asking you to look at the big picture and to avoid technical arguments. We also ask you to refrain from comments. Questions are encouraged and are okay. What is the difference between a question and a comment? If I show you this airplane and you say, Joseph, how does this plane fly? That's a question, that's fine. But if you say, well, I'll never board an airplane because airplanes are dangerous and they cause pollution, that's a comment. Please use the chat feature. The fact chat feature is very powerful. I use it all the time. Everyone can read it or wait until the end for your comment. Questions are, like I said, they are encouraged. So if you have substantive question about what's being presented to you, please ask. We will be asking you to assume certain facts and to accept certain facts. Let me get my PowerPoint. Okay. So these are facts that I think you all agree that are facts, that the Israeli Prime Minister represents Israelis only, that the Palestinian leaders represent Palestinians only. These are, however, the assumptions upon which the simulations will be conducted. And we will ask you to accept those assumptions as facts for the purpose of the simulation. So we can conduct the simulation in a way that will make sense. The first fact is, or the first assumption that we're asking you to accept as a fact is that we held an online election over the internet, and the election was concluded and took place 3 months ago. So we just concluded the election and it took place 3 months ago. For the whole area of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, that 14 million people, excluding minors, of course, were allowed to vote. That's again in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, 14 million people. We also want you to assume that after this election or during the election, 5 million people voted. The 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million Israelis voted. This is an assumption that we are going to be basing this simulation upon. You also have to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes and the vice. So you'll have to assume that I, Joseph, was elected as president, so that it is clear I do not intend to run ever for president of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. In fact, I'm not qualified based on the Constitution to be the president. But in order to facilitate this conversation, please assume that I was elected as president. You also have to assume that 1.3 million people voted for the Palestinian lady, and she will become president in 2 years, and I will become vice president. You'll also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected, and I will ask most of you to act as parliament member, either Israelis or Palestinian, in this simulation. This is not a speech, this is a simulation. So you'll have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected, and that each parliament member represents a district of 47,000 people. In other words, the parliament member does not represent the Israeli people or the Palestinian people. He or she only represents their district, and you'll have to act accordingly. Any questions about those assumptions? Do you understand them? Do you have any questions about those assumptions?
I have a quick question, Joseph.
Yeah, who is this?
It's Libby Traubman.
Oh, yeah, hi, Libby.
Hi, I'm just wondering if this government you're talking about, you say we don't replace one or the other, but is it in competition with the Israeli government?
Yes, it's in competition with the Israeli government and the Palestinian government. And the competition, the Olympic, is making peace. But keep in mind that the common government, its hands are almost literally tied behind its back, because both the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are given a veto power. So yes, it is in competition. Absolutely. Any other question?
Yes, Joseph, I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
It's me, it's Olivia.
Yeah.
When you're looking for candidates for your IPC parliament, Joseph, for Palestinians and Israelis, etc., will people from Hamas be eligible to present themselves as a candidate?
Yes, you're talking about to run for the parliament or the president.
So that's what I've been meaning to ask you this question, but somehow never got round to it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Okay, so under the Constitution, you first have to meet residency requirement, which means you have to be a citizen and a resident of Israel and Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem. So these are the residency requirements: citizenship and residency. And that's why I'm not eligible, because I'm not a resident of the area.
Okay.
In addition to that, and probably more important, you have to pledge allegiance to the Constitution. So
Okay.
just like a congressperson or parliament members in Europe or in the United States or Canada, they all have to pledge allegiance to the Constitution. The same would be for Israeli or Palestinian, regardless of their political views. If they are residents, if they are citizens, and if they are willing to pledge allegiance to the Constitution, yes, by all means, they are all eligible to run for parliament and president and vice president.
Okay, thank you. I got you. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think Nasir raised his hand.
Yes, Joseph. My question about the IPC. So my question is, since the IPC, you say, exists to promote peace between Israel and Palestine and the people of these Israel and Palestine. In the meantime, how does it assure the concerns of Palestinians that they're being taken advantage of, that it's been a long process, and that during this long process, they're faced with land seizures, they're faced with security, for example, settlers that are attacking Palestinians, that the tens of thousands of Palestinians who are in jail, the laws in Jerusalem right now that are basically turning Palestinian neighborhoods, Judaizing them. So what assurances that these measures are going to be dealt with, what meanwhile Israel is making this peace process or negotiation process so long, and that the reality on the ground is changing for Palestinians daily?
Yeah, okay, so the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation will be a government for the entire people of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. It does not replace the Israeli government or the Palestinian government, including Hamas government. So the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation cannot give assurances to the Palestinians or to the Israelis. What it could do, so whatever measures the Palestinians or the Israelis have to protect their interests, we are not asking them to abandon those measures. They shouldn't be abandoning them. We are not proposing that they would abandon them. We are saying, in addition, so think about it. Let's say you have a doctor that recommends surgery and a doctor that recommends medication. We are not saying stop the surgery or stop the medication. We are saying, in addition to those doctors, we also suggest that you exercise and eat well. And if you still need the surgery or if you still need the medication, by all means, we're not asking you to stop doing that. But what we are saying is, it's a possibility that if you exercise and eat well, you may not need the surgery or the medication. Was that clear? Did I make my?
Yes, thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let me ask Mr. Baltiansky. Mr. Baltiansky, are you willing to accept those assumptions for the purpose of the simulation?
Thank you. Hi to all. First, one request, if I may, please call me GADI. Okay, I feel more comfortable.
Okay, no
Thank
problem.
you. And as an outside observer, I obviously accept the assumptions and looking forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so let's go on. So now we are asking people, in order to conduct the simulation, we are going to be asking people to be acting as Israeli Prime Minister, Hamas leader, and as a PA president. Do I have a volunteer for Israeli Prime Minister?
Len Bennett volunteered.
Okay. Mr. Bennett, you'll be Israeli Prime Minister. And what about PA leader? Do I have a volunteer for for a Palestinian Authority leader? And I also need a Hamas leader.
Joseph, this is Amnon. I'll be the Hamas leader.
Okay. And I need someone to be the PA leader. I have 2 participants raising their hands, but okay, do I have a PA leader? We can do it as we go along. I will need a PA leader, someone to be.
Yeah, you have 2
Two
volunteers.
people. You have
Okay.
Shahira raising
Give me
her
a
hand.
name.
Shahira is raising her hand.
Shahira, okay, terrific. She'll be the PA leader, and Amnon Hamas and Bennett Israeli leader. Okay, terrific. The rest of you, I will ask you to be either Israeli parliament member or Palestinian parliament. So you'll have to choose right now. Are you Israeli parliament member or are you a Palestinian parliament member? And if you are, and you don't need to tell me, just we'll take a vote soon just to demonstrate how it works. And you also have to decide and be intellectually honest. What is your area what is your district? Is your district in Gaza? Is your district in Tel Aviv? Is your district in a mixed district? Are you representing both Israelis and Palestinians? Just decide for yourself. And I will be asking you to be consistent in who you represent. And if you represent a mixed district, be consistent. And remember, you represent your district. You do not represent the Israeli people or the Palestinian people. You only represent your district, the interest of your district. I am the president of the whole area, and I represent the entire area. You only represent your district. So let's take a sample vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Just vote yes, so we see how many we have. Okay, it looks like we have 16 Palestinian parliament members. And let's have the Israeli parliament member, please vote.
So to be clear, if you're president of Palestine, prime minister of Israel, or leader of Hamas, you are not a parliament member.
Correct. You're not. You're a separate government. And you cannot vote, but you'll be given a veto power.
Yeah, because I
Okay.
think last time some people were confused about that.
Yeah, one person was, and I think he was corrected. Okay. So we have 13 Israeli parliament member, and we may have more joining later. Some people are reluctant to vote, and we've seen this number change. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Well, what about a mixed district?
And that's the Constitution. So we are elected government, we have a president, we have parliament members, and now we have a constitution that we need to ratify. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli government, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. So it is clear, this paragraph says the Israeli government and the Palestinian government could agree to whatever they wish. We are constitutionally prohibited from undermining or superseding those agreements between the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislator and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. So we are basically saying whatever legislation we pass that has to do with the domain of control of those governments, the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, we voluntarily give them a veto power. They can cancel those legislation, and it doesn't have to be a unanimous. Each one of them can veto the legislation. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to the IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges with a system to avoid biased decision based on nationality. Does anyone have any questions regarding this constitution? And by the way, this is the short version of the Constitution. It's an explanation of the Constitution. I see, okay, so some people raised their hand. Jay, you have a question?
Yes, regarding the next to the last item about the secular government. What interaction will the religious entities inside both countries, but particularly Israel, have regarding this seeming conflict between the secular government and either the Hasidic laws and cultural religious experiences of both areas? Is there a conflict there?
I'm sorry, a conflict between the Confederation and the separate Israeli and Palestinian government?
Yes, if you have the creation of a secular government that runs directly in opposition to many religious, like the Shah's party in particular, or other so-called fundamentalist or ultra-Orthodox religious groups who simply at this point so far, refuse to cooperate with the secular government if they don't feel their interests are fully protected and can be advanced.
Well, to answer your first question, it seems to me that it is in conflict with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, because those governments do not separate religion and government. But we do. So, but we give them a veto power over the legislation that we pass. That's why they have the veto power.
Well, thank you. I just see that maybe it's something we can discuss later if we have a representative at some point from the religious groups.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit in the same way. How would you reassure, especially Israeli voters? Palestinians don't have a strong tradition of democracy. So how can we feel that that they will make a valid contribution and will stick to these constitutional principles, given their track record?
Well, neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians have a history of a democracy. When Israel was created, 95% of the Israelis, including the Palestinians in Israel, most Jewish people did not have a history of democracy. They came from Europe, from Russia, from Arab countries. Neither one of them have a history of democracy. The Palestinians that are inside Israel, that are part of Israel, also did not have a history of democracy, and the Jews inside Israel did not have a. So the purpose of creating a democracy is to assure everyone that there is a system of transparency. So really the Constitution creates a system of transparency that would assure everyone, the Palestinians and the Israelis. And, you know, voting is very, very simple. It's very easy. It's easier than riding a bike, much easier than riding a bike. And once you create the system, and that's what we are creating, then we can move on to a democracy. Any other questions?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So if there arises a question of the constitutionality of any act of the IPC, would there be within the judicial branch something similar to the Supreme Court in the United States that would decide on decisions of constitutionality?
Yes, the Constitution does have a provision for the third branch of government that is equal branch. By the way, in Israel, the Supreme Court is not equal to the other branches, because in Israel, the Supreme Court is created by the Knesset. It's not created by a constitution. So the Knesset in Israel prescribe the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court in Israel is not independent because it does not receive its power from a constitution, because Israel does not have a constitution. We are proposing true separation of power based on a constitution and based on giving the Supreme Court equal power from the Constitution, not from the legislative body. I hope I answered your question. Any other question? Ms. Gadi, do you have any questions regarding the Constitution?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so
Hey,
let's take a vote.
Joseph, real quick,
Yes,
can I touch on something that Jay Johnson mentioned? He said that we believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all peoples residing in Israel and Palestine. This refers to the Confederation. It doesn't say that we are calling for secular governments of Israel and Palestine. I think that that's the confusion here, is that people think that this statement is in regards to the governments of Israel and Palestine, not the Confederation.
oh, okay, you clarified it. Thank you. Okay, let's take a vote. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members vote to ratify the Constitution. Okay, 93% of the published the vote. 94% of the Palestinian parliament members voted to ratify the Constitution. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members, please. Do you support the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation Constitution? Okay, 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this constitution. So congratulations. We have a government and we have a constitution. And let's go to Gadi now, and I'm gonna stop sharing and hear his opinion or opinions regarding this constitution that was just passed by overwhelming number of parliament members.
Thank you. So I will not refer specifically to every single sentence, but in general, first of all, I would like to congratulate you for your interest and for your efforts. It's not taken for granted, and for us, people who live here in Israel and Palestine, the interest of people outside is a vital component in our own fight for peace. And I think creativity is needed. Thinking outside the box is always important and essential. And regardless, this point or another, or this concept or another, the very fact of trying and thinking and suggesting, I think should be very welcome. So I thank you for that. I'm a traditional supporter of the two-state solution. But I don't think in terms of a Chinese wall or a Berlin Wall, if you want, between the two future states. I do believe in cooperation, and I think different systems should be considered. My only point at this moment that I would like to raise is the questions regarding a joint constitution or a joint confederation. Is the right time to do it after a two-state solution is agreed upon or before? Is it feasible to do it before a political agreement on two-state solution? Because when you speak now about two governments, one can ask about the Palestinian government. They still live under occupation. They are not really free and independent. So in order for them to be an independent actor, in my view, they need to fulfill their own right for self-determination, namely to have a state with these limitations or others. So without reaching this previous setting, it is hard for me to see the implementation of your ideas, but I think they're worth consideration, discussion, and elaboration for sure. One specific question, and I will end my comment with that at this point, regarding one of the questions that was asked just a couple of minutes ago. If you divide the entire area to districts, and you have 300 members from the districts, and in order to be elected, you have to be committed to the constitution and to the idea of a secular government. You have to take into consideration then that several districts will not participate in the democratic game, because those districts are by definition religious or ultra-religious, both in the Jewish side and on the Muslim side. Maybe on the Christian side, we have less districts that are purely ultra-religious. So my only questioning at this point on specifics, besides the general framework, would be, how do you answer to the possibility of excluding significant segments of both societies?
Well, I'll answer that by legislation coming up. But my first question to you is, do you see a common government, a confederation, inconsistent with self-determination for the Palestinians?
So I can see a common body. I don't know if you want to call it a government or you want to call it any other name. After establishing a political solution, which in my view, the feasible one is a two-state solution, because otherwise, if you have an Israeli government who can veto any decision, as you said, by the new body, and the Palestinian government that can veto it anyway, they will lose their power in a minute, because any decision that will not be in a consensus will be vetoed by one of the actors. Now, if it is a consensus, then what you need is a coordinating, cooperating mechanism. But I'm not sure I would call it a government, because for a government, you need the state. So one can be creative regarding the name. I for sure see a place for something joint, because there are so many areas that are common, no matter what will be exactly the political solution or where the line will be. There are so many issues that are crossing those borders that you need such a body. I'm not sure the word government is the best way to describe it.
Okay, so we are going to be dealing with two objections that you raised. The first objection is, would all Israelis and Palestinians be willing to participate in and pledge allegiance to such a government? And the second is the possibility of veto by the Israeli or the Palestinian government. So let's take I'm going to share my screen again, and let's go to the next issue, and that is Pledge of Allegiance. So we have the common government. We have, so I was elected as president, and I pledge allegiance. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of president of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. So that's me as the president. Let's now go to the parliament members and see if they are willing to pledge allegiance to such a entity. So let's go to the parliament. Let me read it. Let me read you the first. Let me read you the Pledge of Allegiance. I do solemnly swear. This is for the parliament member. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute my duties as a legislator for Israeli-Palestinian Parliament and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. So, does anyone have any questions about this Pledge of Allegiance? This is for the parliament members that you need to pledge an allegiance. Do you have any questions about this Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, hearing no questions, let's have the Palestinian parliament members. Some of you are from exclusive from area, some are from mixed area. Okay, I see some questions. Could you just shout them out because it's hard for me to see it on the screen?
Sure. Hi, this is Dan here. Just a quick question. How do we know if we're part of the Palestinian or the Israeli parliament, or do we just choose one and go with it for the session, for the sake of the simulation?
You go with it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay, all right. So allegiance to the Constitution, Palestinian parliament members. Okay, so okay, so 94% of the Palestinian parliament members, one parliament member voted no. So this parliament member in the Palestinian, he will be removed because he's not willing to, so we will have to impeach him and he will have to remove because he's not willing to be part of the parliament and is not willing to defend the Constitution. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote, Israeli parliament members. Okay, and the polling, 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of the Constitution. So now let's go to GADI. And what I want to, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to be asking you, GADI, now that you see that in order to participate in the Confederation, you have to pledge allegiance and you have to accept the Constitution, even if you are in a religious area or whatever. So does that change your views regarding the first objection that you raised?
So what I'm saying, first of all, I wouldn't define it as an objection. I like to present it as question marks. But what I'm saying is that I'm afraid that enough people will not pledge allegiance to this constitution because it includes a clear reference to a secular government. Religious people, some of them, of course, not all of them, but some of them on both sides will not be able to pledge allegiance to such a term because they believe that a secular government, which defines itself as a secular by definition, is against their values. So they will not participate in the game. So it will be a democracy, a kind of democracy only for those who believe in this kind of democracy, which is not very democratic in my view.
But religious people in other countries of the world are participating in secular government. A secular government is not anti-religious. It's just, it's against including religion including religious laws. So you have people all over the world that are religious, that are Christian, Muslim, Jews, are participating. So
for me, it's not the most crucial point here, but I just want to answer you that, first of all, in Israel, as you know, there's no separation between church and state, not like the US. Second, also in Israel, we had secular governments. What does it mean? That we had the prime minister and the ministers all being secular, which is fine for religious people, it's legitimate. But once you describe it in advance as secular, it means that they are not allowed to promote religious laws or religious steps. Now, I don't want to speak on behalf of Muslims or Palestinians. I also don't speak, of course, on behalf of Jews or Israelis, but as a Jew who lives in Israel, you all know that we call ourselves a Jewish state or a state of the Jewish people. Judaism for us is a religion, but it's also a nationalism. We are, in our identity card, we say that we're Jews as a nation. When we say nation state, we say state of the Jewish people. For us for religious people, for some of us, to force the fact that it will be a secular government, still, although we can practice our religious privately, but for some, it will be hard to accept it in advance, and I'm afraid that they will not cooperate with it.
Yeah, there are people not cooperating with many governments. That's not the first, but you realize, Gadi, that this is a separate government. It doesn't take away the Israeli government. So if the religious people feel comfortable in a Israeli or Palestinian government, it may not necessarily mean that they will not feel uncomfortable in a common government.
I am not saying that they will feel or don't feel comfortable, or they will be able to live with it or not. I'm just saying that in advance, they will. Some of them, I'm talking, I don't know what's the number. I think some of them, it will be hard for them to pledge allegiance in advance. If that would have been the case, if Ben-Gurion, who was the first Israeli prime minister and was a very secular person, in the Declaration of Independence, if he would have written that it will be a secular government for Israel, maybe some would have opposed that, but now everybody would have lived with it. Maybe that would be the case in retrospective. I'm just saying that in advance, I think you will not get the support of some of the religious people on both sides.
If I may intervene, Yosef, I can clarify the matter, because secular has two meanings. There's inclusive secularism and there's exclusive secularism. So inclusive secularism would allow for the autonomy of any religious community. Exclusive secularism means that a democratic vote prohibits a religious identification, which would be opposed by the religious people. So therefore, we would be obligated to go for an inclusive secularism, which allows for the autonomy of religious communities.
I would like to make a comment too, because I think the issue of secularism is only part of the issues that Gadi raises. And it is that what happens if we have these elections for the IPC, but a whole section of the public, say religiously committed people on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, refuse to participate. Well, this is a little bit similar to what happens in reality nowadays in certain countries. In the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, there used to be, I don't know if they still exist, members elected by the IRA sympathizers and the Irish Republicans. They would pledge, they would be elected. They would not go to the parliamentary meetings because they did not recognize the United Kingdom as a legitimate government of Northern Ireland. So you can have that sort of situation But then you have, for instance, in Europe, the European Parliament, for many, many years, the anti-EU crowd did not bother voting. They did not bother sending people to the European Parliament because they thought it was a waste of time. But as the EU's powers increased and as the influence of the European Parliament increased, now they actually they have elections, they send representatives to the Parliament precisely because they feel that they need to counter what they see as the intrusive expansion of the EU and so on. So it's in a sense, it's part of the democratic process and it's in the, it's up to the IPC to be able to be sufficiently inclusive and allow for dissenting voices to feel that it's worth for them to participate.
Oh, okay, I want to go to the next issue, and that is
I'm sorry, Joseph. Nothing. Don't worry.
Okay, I want to go to the next issue that GADI raised, and that's the issue of veto. Okay, so I would like to deal with this proposed legislation, teaching tolerance and understanding. And both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools, devote certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians, as well as teaching Arabic and Hebrew. So this is just a proposed legislation by the common government. Create a mutual task force to ensure the teaching of both languages. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. IPC will be the facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. So this is the proposed legislation that the IPC is bringing forward. Before we take it to a vote, does anyone have any questions regarding this proposed legislation? GADI, do you have a question?
Could I ask a question? Because I think, you know that this is kind of the thing that I wrote to you about, Joseph. I would like to add a measure to say that the goal for the students by the age of 18 to be bilingual, Arabic and Hebrew, for both the people of Israel and Palestine.
Okay, you did not.
Remember in the one that I wrote to you, it had that was one of the goals that was set.
Okay, all right, so yes, okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Any other questions?
How will the teaching of the history be balanced?
Well, the history of the teaching will be teaching, that's a technical question, but it would not be teaching a consensus. It would be teaching the Israeli point of view and the Palestinian point of view by Israeli professors and Palestinian professors and teachers. And it will be up to us. We are a common government made of Israelis and Palestinians. We will make sure that it is balanced in terms of the number of hours and the teachers and all of that. Any other questions? Okay, so let's take a vote. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. All right, let's publish it. 89% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay, let's publish their results. 86% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor. And let's go to the Hamas leader. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No.
Let's go to the PA leader. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No.
Let's go to the Prime Minister of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation? You need to unmute.
No, I accept this, but I just want to make one point. This is not replacing any of the teachings that are going on in the Israeli education system. This I see as being something that we say, okay, so many hours a week, we teach this agenda.
Correct.
That we accept it.
All right, so let's go to GADI and ask for your opinion regarding this legislation that was just passed by both Israelis and Palestinians.
So I very much support this notion. I think it is important and essential. I do think, although that it's a bit partial, I think one could add to it. In fact, if I may now in a minute tell you about my organization, and maybe in a bit later we'll have an opportunity to elaborate on that more. We presented the model for Israeli-Palestinian peace 18 years ago, the Geneva Accord, the Geneva Initiative, which deals mainly with the future. It presents solutions to all the core issues. It didn't deal with the past. Over the years, just quite recently, we completed together, Israelis and Palestinians, a model to deal with the past and to fulfill the right to know, the right for justice, the right for non-recurrence, and I think that learning the narrative of the other, learning history of the other, is very important. But, and here is my reservation, as long as the aim is not to create one joint narrative or one joint history, we can change the future. I'm not sure we can change the past, and we can agree on the future. The one thing that we will never agree on is the past, actually. We will not agree because we heard different stories, different narratives. So I would put an emphasis on knowing the narrative of the other, not of accepting it or adopting it, of knowing how the others see past events from their perspective. I, of course, welcome very much the teaching the languages. We're neighbors. And so my reservation is from the sentence that speaks about draft textbooks together. Each will have their own textbook. It's not a one joint textbook, but we should learn also the textbook of the other, just to know what they are learning, how they see history. We don't have to agree with them on one narrative. That's our own conclusion from our work.
Drafting textbook together could be in the textbook the separate point of view of the Israelis and the Palestinians. It doesn't have to be in separate textbooks.
Right.
Okay. So is your concern about veto power, is that being removed, or are you still concerned about the veto power?
My concern about the veto power is on issues that are more, I would say, in the core of the conflict regarding the future.
Like what?
Like security.
Okay. Let's deal with that.
Even like the issue of right of return or law of return, the identity of each entity, and so on. But regarding the issue of education and narratives and history, I'm not afraid of a veto power.
Okay, so you mentioned security, and we have a proposed legislation, equal number of Israeli and Palestinians on each side for a common Confederation police force. Equal number of Israelis and Palestinians on each side. Different and distinct uniforms. So it would not be Israeli uniform or Palestinian uniform, but it would they'll have their own uniform. It would be independent of the Israeli and Palestinian security forces. It would be independent of them, in cooperation with the separate and Israeli-Palestinian authorities. It would address religious, cultural, and language requirements, facilitate the operation of the joint economic zone, which we could discuss later. We'll have a legislation about a joint economic zone that will be managed by the Confederation. Investigate corruption by administrators who refuse to teach tolerance, investigates allegations of intolerance and racist hate crimes against Israelis or Palestinians, assist in the managing of checkpoints, guard the parliament building and threats against members of the Confederation, and facilitate access and safety of religious facilities. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Okay, please ask the question. You raise I see you raised hands, but I don't know who you are. Oh,
Yes, this is Jay Johnson and Santa Monica. Can you hear me?
yeah, hi, yes, Jay.
Many of these items are fraught, absolutely fraught with problems of implementation. This goes to, I think, one of the fundamental issues of the whole Confederation concept, and that is we're starting off with a very, very big picture. Now, as Giacomo explained earlier, there were groups in the EU who refused original participation, but they grew into some form of cooperation over time. I think that concept applies here. It's one thing to say,
What is the question, Jay?
the question is, how can you grow into this question, this issue of the police force, rather than jumping into it all at once arbitrarily? It has to be started on a very small areas of cooperation.
No, it's not arbitrarily. We are the government. We were elected. We decided to do it.
I thought we agreed it's not a government. The word entity.
No, we did not agree. We agree that it is a government. This is the assumptions we're working under. And we have a parliament. I am the president. And we decided, it's not arbitrary. We decided to have a Confederation police force, but really, you're not asking a question. You are making a comment. Does anyone else has a question? Okay, let's take a vote.
I have a question, Joseph, if I can.
Yeah, sure. Is this GADI? Yeah.
Yes. My question is why it is needed.
Oh, because the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are not able to make peace. And they are not able to deal with any of the issues that this police force will be able to do. They're working they're occupying the Palestinians.
No, I understand the current reality. My question is, in this model, why do you need I'm not against it. I'm really asking, why do you need a joint police force in order to do what? There will be two independent security forces according to this model.
It would be a common police force for the Israelis and the Palestinians, so that it would manage the areas that are in conflict, like, for instance, the areas that are religious sites, checkpoints. It would not be, so if you are a Palestinian, you don't want to be under Israeli soldiers all the time. You want to have Palestinian also. Yeah. So the same with Israelis. You don't want to have Israelis all the time.
So it is relevant. So let me make sure that I understand. It is relevant only for the time that the conflict goes on, that there is a conflict?
No, it's relevant until we decide that it's not relevant anymore.
Okay, can I speak? Can I say something?
Yeah, but wait, no, questions, because we need to take a vote. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members vote.
Okay, could I ask a question before we vote?
Yeah, questions, but not comments.
Okay, yeah. Would this be the police force that would protect, for example, like, for example, the old city, which has like Christian, Muslim, Jewish states, and say, for example, like towns that are right now facing attack by Israeli settlers because they don't have, the Israeli army will not take measures to stop these attacks. Is this the purpose of this police force?
Yes, it is the purpose of the police force, to be fair to both sides.
Yeah, so like
Okay, so let's have the
Gadi's,
Palestinian vote.
because Mr. Gadi's asking why, and I'm saying these are two specific reasons. Like, for example, when you have the Israeli army that cannot protect the Palestinian people, so. Yeah.
Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members vote to create a common police force. Okay, let's publish the results. 94% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this creation of this police force. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Let's publish the results. 71% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. So congratulations, we are now having a police force. And let's go to GADI and get his comment regarding what was just passed, which was a common police force. We just passed that.
So again, my original point was the question about this model, if it can be introduced in the current situation when both sides are in conflict, or it will be relevant for a post-agreement era. Of course, coordination between security forces is welcome and is helpful, and it's happening actually right now. Under the Oslo agreements, we had joint patrols of Israeli soldiers and Palestinian policemen. Why it ended? Because of violence and because of the conflict that caused incidents, and it stopped. We had it. In a post-agreement era, like in the model that we present in the Geneva Initiative, yes, we have joint cooperation. We have also multinational forces that can include Israelis and Palestinians, including in the old city, holy sites, and so on. But now, if the Palestinian police is running the security, the internal security of the residents of Nablus, why should I be interested in bringing Israeli policemen there? Why? If there is an agreement, then it depends on the agreement. But right now, I would like to stop the occupation, and I don't want to see Israeli soldiers in the city of Nablus. So why I have to bring them now?
Gadi, I don't think you understood the concept as applied here. It's not an Israeli police and it's not Palestinian police. It's Israeli-Palestinian police force. It's a common police force. We believe that the Israeli government and the Palestinian government are a failure. They did not make peace. They did not reach an agreement. The occupation is still going. So we believe that it is unthinkable that the Israeli government would say, we would be the only police force, and it's unthinkable that the Palestinian government would say we will be the only, because they failed. Now, the common police force, Israelis and Palestinian people together, will protect fairly, just like we have in the United States. You have the FBI and this, protecting the entire system. It's a system for everyone. It's not just the police force for the state of California or the state of New York. It's for everyone. It's making sure that the Constitution, that everyone is being treated fairly. And the way to do it is to have Israelis and Palestinians together under one command, not Israeli command and not Palestinian command, but a command.
So I'm not sure you're presenting the model with full transparency, because what you are not saying is that you're advocating, which is of course more than legitimate, advocating one state, which is again more than legitimate. But the meaning, I understand why you don't want to say it, because you don't want to support one model or another. But the translation in real terms is a one state, which again, it is a legitimate position, but to hide it, I'm not sure is 100%.
Joseph, let me ask a question. The creation of a uniformed police force, when you say that you're posing like toward a one state. Now, can we just ask the question, like, is there certain areas, like for example, Burqa, right now, the little village of Burqa, that's under attack by the Israeli settlements that are next to it. The Palestinian Authority has almost no jurisdiction on this road. So therefore, the joint force, even during times of joint cooperation, were unable to protect these villagers from Israeli settlers. And the Israeli army is only able to protect the settlers. So this joint police force, wouldn't you say, would be something to remedy this problem? Because you have certain areas, even under joint cooperation, where there was no protection of Palestinians, because it was
absolutely, and I don't think that GADI is disputing that. But I think that, let me respond to GADI by asking a legitimate question: are we supporting one state? And the answer is, in my opinion, one state is the best solution, because it's the most democratic, and it's not going to be a Jewish state, but it's not possible because neither the Israeli government nor the Palestinian government would agree to it. You cannot dismantle those governments. So that's why we have a constitution. And in the constitution, we say specifically that we are not dismantling the Israeli government. We are not against the Palestinian government. We are in favor of them staying and agreeing. But since they failed to do it for 73 years, we are in favor of creating a common government that would incrementally deal with issues. So it's not a one state, it's a confederation government.
Joseph, can I just interject, saying that in any case, since there's a veto power on the sides of all the national authorities,
absolutely,
there would have to be an extremely high level of consensus to have this force. Probably in practice, if this were ever to happen, there would be a lot of provision for the Israelis and Palestinians to control how this force is deployed, and its scope of action, and its statutes and everything. So it would have to be a very high level of consensus for this to actually work.
Very good.
Question. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What make you to believe that the Israeli government, with exclusive power, what's happening there, will agree to have a competing security force? They rejected all the idea of international peacekeeping forces on Jordan River or whatever, and they said that they will take care, and this is their responsibility. Why they will agree to this? Who gonna force them to agree to this?
Well, you just saw the Prime Minister of Israel agreeing to it.
I'm talking about,
I'm sorry. I don't think we took a vote.
Excuse me, I did not agree to it.
No, you're right. You're right.
Nobody asked me.
Yeah. Okay. So let's ask the Hamas leader. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No.
Let's ask the Israeli Prime Minister. Are you going to veto this legislation?
Yes, I'm vetoing it. There is no necessity. I expect that we are going to have a two-state solution. If we don't have a two-state solution, we are destroying the Jewish people, and I'm against that. The Palestinians, when they have a state, will have their police, and they will take care of their citizenry. And Israeli, as they do now, will take care of their own people. There is absolutely no need to have another body superimposing itself on top. Okay. This IPC is an advisory group It's not a police organization.
Okay, let's have the Palestinian Authority president. Do you veto this legislation?
No.
Okay, all right. So
can I ask the Israeli Prime Minister something? Do you feel that there are certain areas where this type of body would be, like the old city, for example, in Jerusalem, where where buildings are right next to each other?
No, I think I live in a, no, I don't think it's necessary. I think we're right now Israel protects the all the different religious organizations. They can certainly have cooperation with the whatever the Palestinian Authority is going to be, or the Palestinian state. But in effect, if these are properties in Israel, it'll be Israel's responsibility to guard them. The same as if there are areas in the Palestinian zone, it'll be the Palestinian responsibility to ensure that that these places are protected. It is in my country.
So we have a veto. We have a deadlock. So I am the president. I am proposing new legislation requesting reconsideration of or further negotiations. So this is the Parliament. I am the president. This is the legislation that I am proposing. The Parliament of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation.
Joseph, you have to share your screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, I'll do it in a second. Okay, share my screen. Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
You know, this is interesting legislation, because when someone says that Israel is doing a good job at protecting the city, when you have organizations like Lahava that walk through the city's Arab parts of Jerusalem, vandalizing, attacking people, and carrying banners, basically calling the death of a particular race of people, it tells me that you don't really understand the situation in Jerusalem.
And when you have charters for the PA or the PLO and Hamas,
it could be any charters, but your cities, they're not in your cities. They're not in your cities where you live, in your neighborhoods, vandalizing your stores and your shops. That's a difference.
Right, but they're going through my city where I live, calling to rape Jewish women and girls. So I don't have to listen to your side of it either.
Oh my Lord.
And this is all rather doubtful. But to get to the point on the Israel Prime Minister veto previously on the procedure here, I have a comment to make, and that this is the sore point of the whole model being presented. There is a resolution of it, but I'd like to outline how, and that is that a confederation voted on by the populists in various districts becomes a representative of civil society. It is very much like a constitutional convention. And in order to be ratified, it has to be ratified by each of the member governments in the Confederation. Okay, so now the Israeli government would likely not ratify such a convention because the Israeli government is configured to be a representative of the state of Israel and not of civil society itself, because it calls itself defines itself as a state which is apart from the civil society, which is broader than the constituency of the state. Okay?
Okay.
So in order to resolve that contradiction, what happens is that there has to be a timeline here as well, in that a resolution of the Confederation is presented by the Israeli government, and if it doesn't accept it, then it loses the next election.
Okay, so sorry, but we need to move on.
Procedure.
So here is the
and reply to
legislation
GADI
that
as
I am
well.
proposing.
This is what I wanted to explain.
Okay.
Just let me finish. The conclusion, Yusuf, is important. This unlocks this procedure and makes it real. Confederation is possible, Gabi, because the Israeli government will be obliged to follow it because it is the logical course of action.
Okay, so here we are I'm proposing this legislation in light of the Israeli Prime Minister veto, requesting reconsideration or further negotiations. Do you see my screen now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
The Parliament of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is concerned with what we believe is an unnecessary veto. We earnestly urge the Israeli and Palestinian leaders to consider the benefits of the legislation will have on Israelis and Palestinians. We appreciate your willingness to participate in this process and understand your obligation towards your constituents. We believe that upon reconsideration, you are likely to remove the veto. We are open to reconsider any specific objections to amend the legislation and address legitimate concerns. So let's take a vote on this. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this request for reconsideration. Okay, and let's have the Israeli parliament members vote. I'm sorry, yes, so we had 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voting in favor of this request for reconsideration. Let's have the Israeli parliament members. Okay, let's end the polling. 91% of the Israeli parliament members are voting to request the Israeli Prime Minister to reconsider his position. Mr. Prime Minister of Israel, are you willing to reconsider your position?
I vetoed only one thing. I vetoed a joint police force.
Yeah, I know. That's the legislation we want you to reconsider.
No,
we
I
have
don't.
five and a half.
I do not reconsider it.
Okay, so
I think it's clear that you're asking not just for reconsideration, but as a part of that, to enter into negotiations about the nature of the police force.
exactly. So, Mr. Prime Minister, any specific issues you have, here is the legislation.
I trust the Palestinian police force to police their areas responsibly, and I expect the Israeli police force.
Mr. Prime Minister, any
Yes.
specific part of the legislation you would want to change?
I reject the whole concept of a Confederate police force.
Mr. Prime Minister, are you aware that 5 million people voted? And
Yes.
we have 300, almost the unanimous request by the parliament members for you to
Yes.
reconsider. These are, a lot of these people are your constituents.
Yes, it is. And if my constituents don't like it, they will vote me out the next time. It's not your responsibility to usurp my responsibility.
Okay.
I would propose an amendment and a compromise that the concept of the police force be rephrased to areas of emergency, humanitarian, and medical cooperation as the first step of coordinating the two entities to mutual assistance and mutual support as building blocks that could create a more extensive effort in the future, such as the airport, roads, etc. But preliminarily, it would be of humanitarian and of a medical nature, emergency medical services, ambulances, etc., which would be both non-political and non-religious generally, and that could be a basis for cooperation.
Mr. Prime Minister, are you willing to accept that?
What Ray is suggesting is bilateral negotiations for areas of common interest, and I accept that 100%.
But would you accept a common police force?
No.
For areas that
word police, the hang up is the word police. You need a substitute word for
no,
police.
It's not a police. You have two separate police forces, and they're going to cooperate on areas of mutual interest. And that's what Jay has said, and I agree with him. But
Yes, I understand, but
it's not a separate police force.
I understand what the Israeli Prime Minister is speaking for. He's speaking on behalf of the sovereignty of the state of Israel. Now,
I beg your pardon?
you're
did you just
speaking on
say?
behalf, you're advocating.
Did you say the fallacy of the state of Israel?
No, sovereignty. Do you know what
Oh,
sovereignty
sovereignty,
is?
right, thank you.
Yeah, that's your position. I understand it.
Of course.
So you've rejected a joint Palestinian-Israeli police force. You've rejected a peacekeeping force, a joint force. And now I propose to you something else, which is a peacekeeping force of the United Nations, as was done in 1956. Do you accept such a peacekeeping force?
All right, I'm sorry.
See, you don't have an answer.
Let's go to
I don't have to answer you, Abraham.
Let's go to Gadi
let's make it
now.
a resolution then. It's a motion.
Okay, so Gadi, now you saw how a certain, the police force has been vetoed. And my question to you, Gadi, is do you think that an Israeli prime minister would be able to withstand internal and external political pressure? Would he expose himself as a person that does not want peace in light of his failure or his government's failure for 73 years to make peace with the Palestinians?
So I think, first of all, the prime minister can agree to it under certain circumstances. Abraham just suggested to call it a peacekeeping force. In order to have a peacekeeping force, you need a peace to keep. So that's why I believe when the Israeli prime minister here opposed, he also said that if we will have a two-state solution and they will have their own state, then each one will have his security forces, and of course they can cooperate. A peacekeeping force can act only after there is peace. So the basic assumption, which I also saw in your statement, that the two-state solution has been attempted numerous times. This is, I'm quoting from your statement.
Correct.
How many times exactly?
Well, in
the
United Nations voted on this two-state solution in 1947. And there was and it was never implemented. And then there were many negotiations for two states, starting even before the state of Israel. And then there was with Rabin and Prime Minister Rabin and Barak and Olmert and you know,
so
how many more would you want?
No,
and it's still going on.
I'm just talking about facts, not about views.
Okay, so you actually are. I'm sorry, you're actually arguing against your own position of a two-state because you're saying that it's not even been negotiated.
No, on the contrary. What I'm saying is that real efforts to achieve a two-state solution were never done, by the way, by Rabin. He opposed the establishment of a Palestinian state, and he never negotiated a permanent status agreement. In Oslo, the agreement was to start negotiating 5 years after the agreement, but as we know, he was assassinated and never even start to negotiate permanent status agreement. Barak indeed started, but it was not a full-fledged effort because for the Palestinians, when they came to Camp David in 2000, they saw it as a beginning of a process, while Barak saw it as a possible end of a process. And the Americans didn't do the right preparation for that. And we had talks till days before the Israel elections, when we got very close in Taba 2001. But then Barak lost the elections and Sharon was elected, who never believed even in a dialogue with the Palestinians. And those Camp David and Taba talks actually led to the one existing model for a two-state solution, which is the Geneva Initiative, which again is supported and signed by senior people from both sides, including ministers and others. But so it was a kind of a mini effort in Barak, and there was one more effort, which you mentioned, and rightly so, by Prime Minister Olmert and President Abbas. They got very close. Indeed, they didn't finish the job because Olmert had to resign and go to his own trial. Both of them say that if had they continued, they believe at least that they would have reached an agreement. And that's it. 1.5 or maximum 2 real efforts to try a solution. So the basic assumption that it is not achievable, I think, should be questioned. Why I'm saying it? Not to sell my own, merchandise. I'm for any agreement that doesn't violate the red lines. If there is, I'm at all not against the Confederation, by the way. If there is a Confederation, fine. I know I'm pro peace. Whatever solution is being found, and both sides can live with it, I'm for it. I'm just saying that for the essence of Israelis, which is different from the Palestinians, for the Israelis to have a state to which the Jewish people have the key to its door, it's the raison d'etre of the state. That's why we can have a one-state reality, but it won't be right now a solution. Maybe 5 generations from now, 10 generations from now, I don't know. Maybe it's a nice dream to have. I don't oppose it at all. But realistically, even if you take the leftist party in Israel, I know Meretz, okay, not to speak about labor, they will never agree to a one state because of demographic, because then Jews will don't have the key. The Palestinians can live with it. For them, it's a fallback. If it's a democratic state, that's fine, because democracy, there will be 50% or more of that's fine for them. But for the Zionists, it's completely against the Zionist movement, which is the leading force within the Jewish society in Israel. So the issues like police forces and even education and history and narratives are all good ideas. The only question is a question of timing. And I still think that it's more realistic to talk about it after there is an agreement and not in the current situation. When there is occupation, there is conflict, there is violence, then I do believe that indeed no Israeli prime minister will allow Palestinian policemen to get into Israeli neighborhoods or villages.
Mr. Gadi, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah,
Because
let's open up for
just
questions.
a real quick question.
Okay, so let me read the order if it's okay with the. Okay, so let's have Charles ask the first question, and then Nasir, and then Abraham, and then Amnon.
Will you put me on the list, please, Joseph?
And
Will
Olivia.
you put me? Okay.
Okay, Charles, please ask.
Mr. Gadi, I think the part of the problem is that both sides have a hard time acknowledging exactly where they're at, where the status quo actually is. They each have their own perspective on it, and they want to hang on to that. And yeah, I think that either a one-state or a two-state solution could be a solution if it was a just solution. The question is, how could the majority of the people get there when you have at least a large minority on each side that doesn't trust the other? And so my question to you is, if you see the Geneva Accord as feasible for it to be implemented, well, it's a two-part question. One is, what would be its, from where would it obtain its legitimacy with the people itself? Because the same questions you have about the IPC could be put to a two-state solution as well. You know, there could be large minorities on both sides that would seriously object to it. And the second is, how would you go about increasing the trust in the overall population to make any solution, either the IPC, a one-state or a two-state solution, become a feasible reality?
Gadi?
You want me to
Yeah, please answer
okay.
the question.
Thank you, Charles. I think, first of all, you know, in conflict resolution, there is this model. What are the three things that are needed in order to reach agreement? I know there are other models, but I'll quote this one. The three things that are needed is leadership from both sides, courageous leadership. I guess the second is that the people will feel that they had enough of a bloodshed. I mean, that they paid enough price, so they're willing to make the compromise. And three, that there is more or less a concept of a model of how the solution will look like in general. In our case, in the Arab-Israeli conflict, not only the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we had very few cases when we had leaders from both sides. That's why we had peace with Egypt, because we had courageous leaders on both sides. And Rabin and Arafat were courageous enough to make a significant step forward, recognizing each other, first of all. We recognize the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and the PLO recognized the state of Israel. And but we lack it. The question of bloodshed, it's subjective. We only know in retrospective when we paid enough. In my view, we already paid more than enough. And the third component is a model. The conventional wisdom is about the two-state solution. Now, maybe it is wrong. It is true what Joseph said. It was the concept even, in the last century before the establishment of the state of Israel. All the idea was the partition of the land, because there are two peoples in the land and they all deserve rights. And the logical idea is to make the partition. This is what people think. It is still, Charles, the most preferred option by the two societies. It doesn't enjoy a majority, for sure not in all polls, but no other option is more popular than the two-state solution, even at this point. So I think any agreement will be brought to referendum, should be brought to referendum on both sides, according to the Israeli law. It should, and according to Palestinian commitments in the past also, it should. And in this context, I just remind you that negotiations with the PLO, the very essence of negotiations, was objected by most of the Israelis until the agreement was reached. And when Rabin brought it, then from 65% who opposed it, it came to 64% who supported it. The same, by the way, with the withdrawal from Sinai in the peace of Egypt, with Egypt. Most of Israelis opposed the full withdrawal from Sinai before the agreement was signed. A day after it was signed, the vast majority supported it because it depends on what the government brings and so on. And one last sentence about what you said about trust. It is very hard to build trust as long as the conflict continues. Actually, a majority of Israelis don't trust the Palestinians, and the majority of Palestinians don't trust Israelis, and both sides have good reasons to do it. In a way, that's why we need leaderships in order to reach an agreement without enough trust of the people. That's why you need guarantors and guarantees and a detailed agreement and security arrangements and so on. And that's why in our model of the Geneva Initiative, we insisted on a very detailed model, not just principles, two-state solution based on 67 and that's it. Because, people say the devil is in the details, maybe God is in the details as well. And that's why we presented this very detailed model, which you can find in the website of the Geneva Accord, and we added annexes of 500 pages on everything, environment and economy and everything, not only settlements, border security, Jerusalem, refugees, and so on. So I think it's a task for leadership, but it's up to us, people here in the region and people in the world who care about it, to put this pressure on the leaders to make the extra step, because there's no status quo. You mentioned the status quo. There's no such a thing as the status quo. The situation comes worse and worse on every given day, both on the ground and in the minds of the people. That's why time is of essence here.
Thank you. Joseph, you're muted.
Thank you very much.
Joseph, you're
Yeah,
muted.
let's go to Nasir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gadi, and I want to thank you for your very pragmatic view of the situation. You're probably one of the most pragmatic Israeli people I've heard. I have a question because you mentioned that the initiative at Taba for Barak, it failed because of the election of Shimon Peres. Elmert, because he was facing legal problems. The Israeli narrative that I hear from many people, and as well as Alan Dershowitz, who came and spoke to this group, is that it failed because the Palestinians refused to accept Israel, that they turned to violence. And we even heard it in the chat here. This is a narrative that we hear, and it's so accepted by the Americans, it's so accepted by the Europeans. So that's my first question is, did it fail because of the Palestinians? Or did it fail because Israeli society voted in parties that were opposed to it? My second question is that the Geneva Initiative, which I do support, was really done, I believe it was 2004, 2005. Knowing that the facts on the ground are changing, settlements have expanded a lot, is the map that you have on your website, is it still something that's feasible and able to be done?
Thank you, Nasir. Thank you very much. I agree with you that this narrative, which in Israel is very popular, of there's no partner, that's the way it is called, the Palestinians choose violence over an agreement, is a serious problem, and it's a deep problem, and it is not true. There's no agreement because both sides didn't agree because of political circumstances or personal circumstances. You know, Arafat in Camp David said, and I was there, he said at one point, if I bring such an agreement to my people, they will kill me, they will assassinate me. Okay, I can understand the consideration. But it's you know, for me, I see history. I have other considerations. I can understand his considerations. I can understand political risks that leaders are taking. I don't underestimate them. But it's not a question of they don't accept us. First of all, who is they? There are Palestinians who wouldn't like to see any Jew between the Mediterranean and the river. And there are many Jews that wouldn't like to see any Palestinian also on the land. Okay. I still believe that both are minorities. And most of the people on both sides are realistic people. And most of the Israelis understand and know that the Palestinians will not disappear. And most of the Palestinians realize that Israelis will not disappear. So it is our task, and we at the Geneva Initiative will work, you know, day in and day out on this, because it's a major problem. You know, today I got the results of a poll that we conducted among Israeli youth between the age of 20 and 35. And one of the questions was, what is the major obstacle on the road to peace in your view? The number one obstacle was the refusal of Palestinians to recognize that Jews deserve a state of their own. Not a question of security, not the borders, not settlements. Now this should be tackled. So that's why we are working every day, including today, despite COVID, on meetings between Israelis and Palestinians. 70% of those Israelis that were that participate in this sport, 70% in the age of 20 to 35, never met a Palestinian, never spoke with a Palestinian. So of course, in this reality, mistrust is only growing. And that's why I think we need more of dialogues. And if those kind of dialogues are being facilitated by third party, for me, it doesn't really matter if they support one state, two states, confederation also with Jordan, with federation, whatever. I represent a solution, but I'm a man without solutions. Any solution that will be agreed upon, I support it. I want to live in peace. I want my kids to live in peace here. But what we need is more dialogue, more knowing the other, understanding the other. And this is maybe the best way to fight this false narrative that you mentioned, Nasir.
And the map real quick.
The map, yes, sorry. The map, I would say, you know, in our map, the swap that we suggest of swap of land is 2.25% of the land. A more realistic map today will and it was agreed, by the way, by the late Saeb Erekat, who was the chief negotiator, and by other Palestinian leaders and by Israeli experts, a more realistic swap can talk about close to 4% swap because of the settlement activities. So Israel may need to annex a bit more of settlement blocks and then give away in return more land of Israel. But it's small. There are small changes. In principle, the map is realistic with minor changes that can adjust that should be adjusted, but it's not major differences.
Gadi, we have 3 more people. Is that okay?
Sure. Maybe we can have them together, and then I can respond to all of them together. If it's
So
that'd be great.
I'd like
Okay.
to I have a specific
So
question.
let's have Dr. Abraham, Amnon, and Olivia ask their questions sequentially, and then you'll answer them. Dr. Abraham, please.
Gadi, I would propose that the Confederation is most realistic because it is not a state. The problematic is the state. Now, Israel is a state that exercises its own sovereignty, and in defense of its own sovereignty, it has in effect, exercised sovereignty over another territory, and in order to defend itself. So the problematic is the question of an authority, and Israel's ended up, being the sole authority in the matter, and that to me seems to be the problematic. How to overcome this is that a confederation, precisely because it's not an authority above either of the governments, and it is not a sovereign, can exercise the common consensual, opinion of both parties concerned. So the legal basis for doing so is evident to me in that, there is a peace treaty that's been signed by Israel as recently as 1993. It's signed. It's adopted by the Knesset as well. So this is the basis upon which, there can be the exercising of a peacekeeping force. Now, if the 2 parties do not seem to be able to resolve their differences any further, then it becomes the obligation of a legal authority, which is the United Nations, to send in peacekeeping troops. And legally, the Palestine Authority, the PLO rather, is able to demand that of the United Nations General Assembly, and it can be ratified by the Security Council. And if the Security Council doesn't ratify it, then it can be overruled by the General Assembly as well. There's provision for that. So, it's inevitable that there's going to be a peacekeeping solution enforced by some authority, either a common authority between the 2 parties or by an external authority. So let's save the time and, the stress of this whole duration of such a scenario and just begin to, to negotiate the Confederation here and now.
Thank you, Dr. Weisler. Let's go to Amnon. And guys, keep in mind, Gadi's time is very valuable. He graciously agreed to be here free of charge. And please take that into consideration in you asking the questions. Amnon.
Thank you, Joseph. Good morning to all of you from Los Angeles, and Gadi, Erev Tov Lecha beIsrael. Thank you very much, Gadi, for participating and presenting what's not, in my opinion, an extreme point of view, which is great. I just want to make one clarification and then ask Joseph a question. First of all, the idea of joint police force, would apply only if we have a 1-state solution. Because if we have 2-state solution, that means that every state will have their own police force, their own government, their own institutions. It will be totally separate. So when you have 2-state police solution, you do not need a joint police force. So I totally understand the point of view of the Israeli prime minister, who had a lot of reservations about this legislature of a joint police. The thing that I want to ask Joseph is, could the common government, which you propose in the IPC, could the common government accept other solutions to what has been proposed in order to achieve the so much desired peace?
Yeah, Amnon, let me be brief. The answer is yes, it could, absolutely. And also the 2 states, but also you said you don't need a common government if you have 2 states. Well, we have 50 states in the United States. and we have a common police force called the FBI. So, you know, you need this, a police force that enforces the Constitution and the common laws. But let's go to Olivia to ask Gadi another question.
Thank you, and thank you very much indeed for being with us. It's very, very generous of you, and it's very, very nice listening to you. Right, my question is not about one state, two state, etc. My question is about Israeli civil society and the arms industry. First, let me say, I come from Europe, and there are very strong arms manufacturers in Europe. And our export record, the export record of the biggest arms, when I'm thinking of the UK and other countries, is one of shame. So let me just say, we have no lessons to teach any country. We can only feel shame, civil society, I mean. Now let's switch to your country, to Israel. You have a thriving arms industry, very, very strong, and you export a great deal, all sorts of stuff. I understand from what I read. I don't live in Israel, so it's just from what I read. Lots of surveillance technology and lots of drones, etc., etc. Now you have very good customers, very good clients. Two of them are rather concerning, very concerning. One is India, and the other is the Philippines. Now, Israel trains not only sells to India, but also trains the Indian military, and Israel trains the Filipino police. Now, this is of concern. I'm sure it's of concern to you. You're a man of peace. My question is, are these things debated in civil society? Do you have platforms in which these things are discussed by people like yourself? I've no doubt that these things are terrible for you. And I've followed what you've done, and I very much appreciate your work. You've worked tirelessly for peace, tirelessly in very, very difficult situations. And that is my question. How does Israeli civil society function? And do people, or are these things discussed in the Knesset? Your country is training the Filipino police. We know what they're up to. They're harming their own people with Israeli weapons. That's my question. Thank you again so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. So with your permission, I'll answer in the opposite order, and I'll start with Olivia. To the question how civil society in Israel is dealing with the arms sale, I would say far from good enough. You mentioned shame. I personally, I'm representing only myself. I feel shame. Yes, it is one of our many failures. We fail as Israeli civil society, the Israeli peace camp, on any given day on many things. We are not a success story. We try. There are very good people out there that are trying their best. We did mistakes. By the way, one of the mistakes, in my view, of the peace camp was this notion promoted by Prime Minister Barak when I was his press secretary. I don't want to go into history, but he introduced this idea because of public opinion polls and stuff like that, of the total separation, of we Israelis should be here and the Palestinians should be there. That was the slogan, which became popular. And I think the peace camp supported it, and it was a mistake because we cannot and we should not separate in such a way. So I think we try, we should do better. And on this particular issue, civil society in Israel is not engaged enough. You know, we are busy with occupation, which is really a daily problem for, first of all, for those who are occupied, but also for the occupiers, in our view. We deal with human rights within Israel and in the occupied territories. We deal with question of peace and war, and we don't pay enough attention to many other issues, including arms sales. Unfortunately, and I'm ashamed about it, in the Knesset, it's also very limited. There are maybe three members of Knesset that I know that deal with this issue, try to be supervised, try to discuss it in committees. You know, everything is secret, everything is under the umbrella of Israel's security interest, and then there is a problem to go into details. I have no doubt that some of the arms deals that are done by Israel a reason for shame, not for pride. That's the only thing I can tell you. That I can thank you for raising this issue.
Thank you very much indeed. And I too feel shame for what European governments are doing. Deep shame for our governments.
I hope. Yeah, I
Thank
hope,
you, Mr.
I hope we can change that as well. I know I'm trying to be as honest as I can here. I know it is not in the top of our priorities because we have other issues.
Sure, I understand.
But it doesn't release us from responsibility.
I understand, of course. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Regarding Amnon's comment, I just want to remind us one thing. I know the question was not to me, just because it was not raised in the conversation on the police forces. As you know, Israel has other conflicts and other enemies. Reaching an agreement with the Palestinians, in my view, is the key for the relations between Israel and the entire region. But as long as we don't have such a stability and peace, we have problems with others as well. So we will have to rely on other forces, not only on a joint force, which in my view can emerge within an agreement. It's hard for me to see it in the current situation again, but I'm just reminding us all that the conflict that Israelis sees, it's not only the conflict with the Palestinians, we have other neighbors in this neighborhood. And I left the question of Dr. Weisfeld till the end of this part of my comments. I don't know if it's the end of the conversation at all, because I totally agree with you that we need to save time, and that was your final sentence. I totally agree that it's urgent. Those who care, and I have so much respect to each and every one of you, because you care. You are here for the last 2 hours, and you invest in it much more time than those 2 hours. So I'm thankful to you, and I really have a lot of respect. I think those of us who care need to take this into consideration. And my fear in presenting a model of confederation, not by its own again, but by saying ultimately that this will be the solution, it includes unwillingly, in my view, a legitimization of the settlements. Because if at the end we will have one way or another one state, it means that the settlers can stay where they are. And my fear is that the settlers will benefit from this legitimization, and will say, you see, even people of peace or leftists or whatever they want to call people like me or like my friends and colleagues, they know that the settlements are there to stay. Why should I give them this legitimization? I think that eventually we can reach the confederation. And again, in few generations, maybe it will lead to a one state. But we need to fight, in my view, we need to fight not only in order to put an end to the conflict, but also in order to put an end to the occupation. Because the occupation is not moral, and it violates human rights on every day. And that's why when I speak about the right of Palestinians to have their own state on their own land, means that settlements will have to be evacuated. There, by the way, many of them are on private Palestinian land. And when you speak about the one state, I don't even call it one state solution, because I don't think it will be a short-term solution, maybe in the distant future, but it's one state reality. In a way, we give a kind of a yellow, if not a green light to the occupation, which I at least totally oppose. But it's a conversation between those who care. And I think it's important to intensify the dialogue between the parties, to explore possibilities, to see advantages and disadvantages. I very much salute your creativity and the way that you are handling this issue with this mechanism. I think it's really a beautiful way of enriching the conversation about this issue. And I can only thank you not only for what you have been doing till now, but to thank you also in advance for what you will be doing in the future.
Gadi, I just want to thank you very much for responding to me. I'll make it very quickly. And I totally agree with you on the issue of having a Palestinian-Israeli peace is very essential to the peace in the region, even though we have seen recently that we established peace with the United Arab Republic and Bahrain, regardless of the peace with, but we know that we and the Gulf states have a common enemy in Iran, so that was an idea. And to you, Joseph, I just want to mention that the example that you mentioned before about the United States and the FBI, a common police, the FBI, as you know, interferes only if a crime or an issue is a federal issue. So what I'm saying, if we have two states solution in the Middle East, I don't think that the Palestinian government in its own independent states will allow Israeli police force, even though it's a joint police force, to enter into their jurisdiction to solve crimes and issues there in the independent area. So I feel
we have to let Gadi go. It's really not fair to him.
So I just wanted to tell you that I did not disagree with the analogy that you brought. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Gadi, toda rabba lecha.
Gadi, I want to thank you so much for your generosity, and you really uplifted us. And I personally want to thank you so much, and I'm sure that all of us would like to thank you. You are a real gentleman, and
good job. Thank you so much.
Sure, we all thank you. We all thank you a great deal. Stay safe, Gadi.
And yeah, and we appreciate your time, and we want to thank you, and hopefully we'll be in contact again. Thank you so much, Gadi, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Gadi.